Okay, everyone, welcome to the February edition of Didsbury Sidebar. I hope you can all hear me. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Clare Jonas. She's a psychologist and science communicator, and she's going to enlighten us about what seems like a very interesting subject, which I personally don't know anything about. So I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot. So over to you, Claire.
Thanks very much. Right. Hi, everyone. In case you're wondering what a science communicator is, it's a person who makes a living from taking academic science and turning it into stuff that everyone can understand. So you can tell me how good a job I've done of that at the end of this talk. I've also put up just my logo for my blog there. I have a blog called That Thinking Feeling, where I look at the everyday questions that psychology research can answer. So if you're interested in things like why have we got superstitions, how can we cope with stress, why is it so hard to name smells, those are all up there. You can go and have a look. All right, but tonight I'm going to talk about synesthesia. So first of all, you might be thinking, what is synesthesia? Well, very simply put, it's a situation in which incoming sensory input gets diverted to a different sense. So, for example, you might look at the letter A and see the color red. So this is actually a different aspect of the same sense. There are all kinds of these pairings in synesthesia. Different people have different ones, and they're quite idiosyncratic. So I've put A as red here, but undoubtedly if there is a synesthete who has this kind of synesthesia in the audience, you'll be going, wait a second, no, A is green. So it does vary quite a lot between people. The normal terminology we use to talk about this in synesthesia research is that there's an inducer, which in this case is the letter A, so that would be the thing that gives rise to synesthesia. And there's a concurrent, in this case it's the color red, so that would be the results of the synesthesia. Okay, let's look at a few more examples. So this is Jaune Rouge Bleu by Vasily Kandinsky. And he said that he could hear the noises his compositions make. So you could take a moment to imagine what those sounds might be like. So for example, is the circle at the top center, is that higher pitched than the one at the low right? Is it quieter? Is it louder? What kind of instrument might make each noise? So this might give you an insight initially, if you're not a synesthete, that a lot of people can imagine what it's like to have synesthesia. And in fact, the senses get mixed together in most people, as far as we know. This is something we'll return to later. Another example is number color synesthesia. So this is where a number takes on a color. So this is just an example set of colors that numbers might take on. Another nice one called ordinal linguistic personification, which we normally shorten to OLP because no one's got time to be saying ordinal linguistic personification all the time. Numbers or letters or any other member of a sequence, days of the week, months of the year, might take on a personality and maybe a gender. So, for example, 2 might be a down-to-earth young woman who enjoys running. 3 might be a little girl who's constantly fighting with her brother, who is 4. 7 might be a teenager who often gets into trouble for being rude to teachers. And 0 might be a dignified, kindly old person. So you can see the synesthetic associations here can sometimes be really elaborate. And they're not necessarily sensory. Although a lot of people talk about synesthesia as being a mixing up of the senses, ideas get mingled in there as well. So we can't really say that you can directly sense a personality characteristic like being down to earth, but it still gets involved in the synesthesia. So another thing here is I've put in 2 kinds of synesthesia at once. So it's perfectly possible to have more than one kind of synesthesia. This person has number color synesthesia and ordinal linguistic personification, but you don't have to. Some kinds of synesthesia occur more commonly together than others. So for example, if you think that numbers have colors, you're more likely to think that letters also have colors, but they're still relatively rare within synesthesia. Okay. couple more examples of synesthesia. So these are the synesthetic associations of one specific person, who was the person who took part in this study by James Ward and Jules Simner. So he tastes words. So what I've done here is just put a picture of what he tastes for each of the things. And they make a nice kind of example of all of the different things that can get mixed together in synesthesia in terms of why specific things have specific inducers have specific concurrents. So in this case, we've got bar, which tastes like chocolate. So this is a semantic association, chocolate, because chocolate often comes in bars. So this is a very obvious one. Barbara tastes like rhubarb. So this is a phonological association. They both contain barb. And then we have indirect associations. So speak tastes like bacon. And the theory here is that that's because bacon is streaky sometimes. So speak, streak, they sound a bit similar. Those two have become linked together. So all of these associations exist within just one person. So you can see that synesthesia is a really complicated thing. All right, the final example I've got is my own. So I am a synesthete. My kind of synesthesia involves thinking of anything that comes in a sequence as having a position in space. So I've drawn you my calendar here. So this in real life, as it were, is in front of me, about a foot in front of me. It's about shoulder height and it's slightly wider than my shoulders. And when I want to think about something like an upcoming appointment, I will move along this calendar to think about it. I also have spatial layouts for all kinds of other sequences. These are a bit easier to describe in person because I can wave my hands a lot more, but I'll do my best. So the alphabet is a patch over to my left. Numbers exist in front of me in a sort of hook shape, and they go off and up to the right towards infinity. Playing cards are laid out in front of me in a kind of backwards 7. So they go further and further away from me, from ace to 10, and then jack, queen, king, all in a row along the top. Anything that comes in a sequence, I will eventually start thinking of, as long as I become familiar with it, in one of these patterns. So the most recent example I have of this is back when I was a lecturer, I used to have to regularly mark students' essays, and I developed a spatial layout for this essay is a first class essay, this is a 2-1, this is a 2-2, this is a third, this is a fail. So anything that comes in a sequence. Okay. So quick overview of synesthesia there. The thing that I really want you to get from this as we move into the next one is that being a synesthete isn't just about having synesthesia. So this is really useful for me, this spatial layout of months, because it means I can remember people's birthdays very well. So it's as though I have a little flag on the calendar in front of me going, this is a birthday. And this gives us a clue about synesthetes. The thing about synesthesia is it's not just that which makes synesthetes unusual, it's other things as well. So a quick summary before we move on to that. So synesthesia is surprisingly common. So we aren't really sure how many synesthetes there are because synesthetes don't necessarily know that they have synesthesia. So I didn't know I was a synesthete until I was 20 and I was watching a documentary on synesthesia with my parents and I went, oh, I do that. So if I didn't learn till I was 20 and I then spent 10 years researching it, there must be lots and lots of people out there who have synesthesia but don't know it. It's idiosyncratic. So different people have different associations. I mentioned this earlier. So A might be red for one person, green for another, blue for a third. It's also arbitrary. There's no clear reason why associations are what they are, but there are some patterns. So for example, letters which have similar shapes tend to be similar colours. So R and P are likely to be quite similar colours compared to R and T because they look more similar. It's highly specific. So if someone says A is red, they won't just be satisfied with any red. It will be a very, very specific red, and that tends to cause some trouble when you're doing a study on synesthesia, because it's not enough for it to be red. If you want to do an experiment on someone's synesthesia, you have to get the exact kind of red from them. It's automatic. So as far as we know, if you have synesthesia, you cannot avoid experiencing synesthesia. Some people say they can kind of turn it down, as though you're turning down a radio. Or in my case, I can look away from my calendar or concentrate instead on the surroundings, but it's still there. It's consistent over time, sort of. So there's actually a big debate about this going on in synesthesia research. All of the research that's been done so far has been on synesthetes who are consistent over time, but that might be an artifact of the way we originally defined synesthesia as being consistent over time, because I have met people who I would swear are synesthetes, but they'll say, well, one is red today, but it might be blue or green tomorrow. So there's, as I say, a bit of a debate going on here. The other thing is that synesthesia is lifelong, as the last thing on the list, but it seems to be less settled in childhood. It gradually gets more settled as you get older. And as you go into old age, for a lot of people, synesthesia can tend to start fading. We don't really know why this is, and it certainly doesn't happen for everyone, but it does appear to happen for the majority of people. Okay, so why are there synesthetes, you might be wondering? What possible evolutionary purpose could synesthesia serve? So there are quite a lot of theories about synesthesia. I'll just go through 3 of them quickly. So the first one is from Catherine Monlock and Daphne Maurer. So this is the picture of the baby on the left-hand side. So their idea is we are all born synesthetes. So there are various different versions of this theory. We need to perhaps learn to tell the difference between the senses. So for babies, a loud noise and a bright light might be very, very similar in terms of what's going on in their minds, and they gradually sort that out as they get older. Possibly all babies are literally synesthetes. So obviously you wouldn't have letter color synesthesia as a baby because you don't know what letters are when you're born, but you might have something like sound color synesthesia, where a certain sound is blue, another sound is green. So the idea here is this disappears for some people as we get older. There's some evidence for this theory. It's probably not very strong evidence. I would say that the other 2 theories I'm going to talk about are more likely. So the second one is Mark Watson and colleagues. So their idea is that some people have a genetic predisposition to synesthesia, but they only develop it under certain circumstances. So the reason I've put a picture of a small child reading a book here is because their theory is certain languages might, if you're a native speaker of them, might make it more likely that you are a synesthete. So in the case of English, compared to something like Spanish, we don't have a very clear link between a letter that's written on a page and the noise it makes. Whereas in Spanish, it's almost completely transparent. Like once you know how letters are pronounced in Spanish, you can read aloud with quite a lot of ease, even if you're not a native speaker of Spanish. In this case, English might make it more likely that you have synesthesia than a Spanish speaker, because it's a kind of learning mechanism that can help you understand the links between what a letter looks like and what it sounds like. So if you've got a reminder that R is red and R makes a R noise, then you've got a kind of extra bit of memory that you can use. It's kind of like a mnemonic strategy, but one that's very, very specific to you. Okay. And the third one is Jamie Ward, who was my PhD supervisor. So his theory only came out a couple of years ago. He said pretty much synesthesia is not the most interesting thing about synesthetes. So his idea is that synesthesia happens because synesthetes inherit some genes which alter brain structure and connectivity in ways that go well beyond synesthesia. So you have literally different levels of connection in different parts of your brain compared to people who are not synesthetes. So he says that synesthesia does offer some direct benefits, like those about language learning, but there are many more benefits that have nothing to do with the actual experience of synesthesia, rather they are to do with the more general alteration in brain connections. Okay. I'm just going to briefly stop there and check if anyone has any questions before I go on. All right.
Hang on a minute. Yes, sorry, I was just reading the chat. We do appear to have some questions.
Sure.
I think mine was the first one asking if one is born with synesthesia, and then you brought this slide up and basically answered that question. But Jamel Kinzeller is asking, are we all on the spectrum of synesthesia?
Oh, okay. So I will actually get to this question later. The answer is probably not. People do mix things together across the senses, regardless of whether they're a synesthete or not. But it does look like synesthesia is qualitatively different from not synesthesia, rather than just quantitatively, because it's so specific and it develops in such specific circumstances.
Okay. Carolyn Jones asks, if someone sees A as red, do other letters have different colours, or is only A lit up in a sentence?
Okay. So it varies from synesthete to synesthete. Most will see colours for most, if not all, letters of the alphabet, but you do occasionally get people who have just one letter having a colour, or just a few letters. If that's going to happen, it would be most likely that you'd have maybe just the vowels would have colours, for example.
Okay. And Steve Slatcher asks, it sounds like you distinguish between synesthesia and mingling of senses, thinking in particular of taste and smell. Ripe fruit smelling sweet, for example. Is that right?
Yes. So I will get a little bit into this later, but yes, our senses do work together, regardless of whether we're synesthetes or not, but they work together in much more subtle ways in people who are not synesthetes, so you may not be conscious of them.
Okay, thank you. Leon Barra asks, are there other synesthetes who work creatively or have highlighted their synesthesia in their works?
Yes, there's loads. Hi, Leon, by the way. Some examples off the top of my head. The singer Lorde and Mary J. Blige, the writer Vladimir Nabokov, Richard Feynman, the physicist, probably had synesthesia. He didn't seem to use it creatively, but he has a nice passage in one of his books where he describes telling students about equations and all of the colours of different letters sort of flying around the room, and he wonders what it looks like to them. So yes, there's quite a lot of people out there who use their synesthesia creatively.
Right. Can't see who was asking this, but somebody wants to know if synesthesia research is fed into user interface research or data visualization.
Yes, in a few ways. The most prominent way I can think of is in sensory substitution devices. So these would be, for example, a webcam that takes an image of what's going on in front of you and converts it to sound. So it's useful if you're blind, for example. Some of the principles of synesthesia are used to design the links between vision and sound and those kinds of things. But because synesthesia is quite idiosyncratic, it's difficult to use the general principles from the specific principles from one person to apply to another. You have to look at what a synesthetes generally like, and then apply it to what other people might experience the world like. But we can't necessarily be sure that how synesthetes behave and think is how other people behave and think when it comes to the mingling of the senses.
And another question from Matt Crooks: do people see letters in non-familiar alphabets as colours as well?
Yes, again, depends a bit on the synesthete, but I know one synesthete who was learning, so he's a native English speaker and he was learning Mandarin, and he said that parts of the Mandarin symbols started appearing in colour to him after a while as he was becoming more fluent. You do see people's synesthesia sort of spreading to new things that they're learning in general, so yes.
Okay, Andrew Planet asks, isn't the act of reading without saying the words verbally but hearing them as sounds in the brain is synesthesia common to us all? Is visual translated to audio purely in the brain?
Okay, I'm with you. So not everyone does that, interestingly. Not everyone has an internal voice when they're reading. Most of us do. I would say that's not synesthesia, but a cross-modal correspondence, which is things being linked together across the senses in a non-synesthetic way. And again, this is something I'll come to later.
Okay. And the last question, if I haven't missed anybody out, is from your dad. Is the shape of your calendar curve connected to day length of temperature?
I'm not sure. The first time I remember noticing it is when I was about 8. So I think partly temperature, but I haven't put one aspect of my synesthesia on there, which is, so I've put the sort of vertical positions of the months quite accurately, but the horizontal ones, it's harder to do. So December and January take up between them about half of the calendar, and the rest of the months are kind of squashed to either side. And I think that might be because my birthday is in January. This is just from like discussing this with other synesthetes. Quite often people's birth month is much bigger than other months. So there seems to be lots of different things going on in there.
Okay, that seems to be it for now. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
So beyond having synesthesia, what is it like to be a synesthete? So just a reminder here, we're looking at this because Jamie Ward had this theory that what is most interesting about synesthetes is not their synesthesia, but rather everything else about them. So synesthetes are different from others in more ways than just their synesthesia. So here are some examples. Synesthetes tend to be better at remembering, and I will explain a bit more about what I mean by that in a minute. More creative in some ways, more empathetic. So this is specifically linked to a kind of synesthesia called mirror touch, where you literally feel someone else being touched on your own body. And one of the theories about that kind of synesthesia is that it's sort of an overactive empathy system. If you like, you become so empathetic that you literally feel what other people feel. Some synesthetes are worse at mental arithmetic. So this certainly applies to me. I am pretty good at maths, but if you give me quite basic mental arithmetic problems, I am not very good at them, which was a real struggle for me during GCSE maths, because I would have to, like, I'd know the principle of what I was doing, but I would really struggle to get the numbers correct. Synesthetes are also more likely to have some health conditions like anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and strangely irritable bowel syndrome. So this appears to be linked to the general synesthetes having brains with different connectivity compared to other people. There might also be a relation with the immune system here, which is why irritable bowel syndrome comes in. So some of the genes that deal with brain structure and some of the genes that deal with immune function overlap with each other. So you end up with this interesting kind of constellation of things that tend to occur together. All right, so as I said, synesthetes are pretty good at remembering. So synesthetes, in fact, tend to have better memories than non-synesthetes for things related to their synesthesia. So this is pretty obvious if you think about it. I will explain why using the example of my lovely friend Mel. So there she is, and Mel's birthday is coming up. But when is Mel's birthday? For me, looking at the calendar that I've got in front of me, I go, well, Mel's birthday is on the near right, so she must have been born in February, March, or April. And from that, I can narrow it down to Mel was born on March the 6th. So this is really useful for me. Like I said, I've got these little flags of when someone's birthday is coming up. And this is quite useful if you think about it in evolutionary terms. This kind of thing, being able to have a better memory for the social aspects of life, which is one thing you can use your synesthesia for, is probably likely to strengthen bonds between people. So that's one reason synesthetes might be still around today, even though their synesthesia isn't necessarily particularly useful in and of itself. Okay, synesthetes aren't just like that about things that are related to their synesthesia. It's also having better memories for some things that aren't related to your synesthesia. So I've actually got my parents here, and they can either confirm or deny that this is me, age something, in a small village called Rochegude in the south of France, where there was a pizzeria. My great aunt and uncle lived there. We spent a couple of weeks there many summers as a childhood, in my childhood, in a house that was very, very hot at the top and very, very cold at the bottom. I have very, very vivid memories of this time in France. And part of that is because I am a synesthete. I seem to have just generally a better memory for my personal experiences than most people. So that's memory. Now creativity. So time for some games. You don't have to play if you don't want, but I might enjoy them. So I think, probably the chat function is the easiest way to play this. So we're going to do something called the remote associates test. So this is, I'll give you 3 words in a moment, and you have to try and spot the one word that links them all together. So it's called a remote associates test because they are all associated with one thing, but you have to find the connection between them. Okay, so here is, oops, nope, failing myself there. Sorry, it's because I've opened the chat. Okay. There is your question. So what word links those 3? Not iron. Iron's already on there. So it's a word that doesn't appear. Yes, Sarah, it is bar. So barbell, iron bar, bartender. Okay, thanks very much. All right, so this test is about something called convergent creativity. It's about bringing together disparate ideas to make one unified thing. We also have another kind of creativity, which I will demonstrate now. So this is something called the alternate uses test. So again, we can use the chat function for this. I'm going to give you an item in a second, and I would like you to come up with as many uses as you can for this object. So it doesn't have to be standard uses, whatever you think you could do with it. All right, go. Building, doorstop, paperweight. Murder, thanks Nicola. Raise, for a mouse to hide behind. Throw, build, crush, hammer, doorstop, weight, laptop stand, shelving, a barbell, more of a dumbbell, I think. Oh, yep, you can make a stack or a bookend, a collection, an ashtray, heat storage, a prop and a play, barbecue. Wow, you're going too quick for me now. Oh, a domino, archaeology, oven, bookshelf. Okay, wow, thank you, everyone. Okay, so this is a different kind of creativity, divergent creativity. So this is doing new things with what you already have. So you came up with some really creative ideas there, including the ashtray. I like that one. Just for amusement's sake, the most interesting thing I've ever heard someone come up with for this is you could use it as a coffin for a Barbie, like a little Barbie doll, which weirded me out, but there we go. Okay, so now we know what divergent and convergent creativity are. Synesthetes are better than non-synesthetes at the remote associates test, so the convergent creativity, but they're not better at the alternate uses test, the divergent creativity. So the reason, again, for this makes sense if you think about synesthetes' experiences. Synesthetes are used to going through their whole lives linking together things that no one else links together. So A is red, B is blue, C is yellow, for example. You might be the only person you know who makes those kinds of associations. So you get pretty good at bringing together disparate ideas. Synesthesia isn't convergently creative, though. You don't generate new things with your synesthesia all the time. The other thing about synesthetes is they tend to spend more time engaged in creative activities. So art, sculpture, knitting, whatever you fancy. Those things tend to be done more by synesthetes than by non-synesthetes. So there's clearly some kind of interest in creative activities. One thing I will say there is we need to be careful interpreting some results from tests with synesthetes, because you can't easily compare synesthetes and non-synesthetes without letting synesthetes know that that is what you are doing. And that might mean they are encouraged to present themselves as interesting or special so that you think your research is worthwhile. So I don't mean they're doing this in like a manipulative way, just that they want your research to succeed. So maybe they exaggerate some of their characteristics. All right. Mathematical ability. So this is where a lot of synesthetes fall down, and it's especially synesthetes who have synesthesia that involves numbers. So I won't talk about my own experience with this, but rather the sort of theoretical experience of someone with number color synesthesia. So imagine for a second that you're a 4-year-old learning how to do maths, and you have number color synesthesia, and these are your number color associations. You're also learning about colors. So you know that orange is made up of red and yellow. Now imagine your confusion when you try and add up red 2 and green 3 to make purple 5. So you might end up going, oh, it must be 6 or 7 maybe, because red and green together make brown, sometimes orange. So it makes more sense that it could be those numbers. So you end up maybe with a kind of fundamental, like very early on in learning, you end up with this kind of problem with understanding how numbers relate to each other. Okay, so synesthetes are different from other people, and you might be thinking, synesthesia overall, it sounds all right. Like, can I acquire it if I don't already have it? And the answer is yes. You might not like it though. So there are a few methods for becoming a synesthete. One is you can lose a sense. So this is a case study of a guy called JF who went blind at 43. When he started learning to read Braille, the dots appeared to have colours. So the reason for this is that when you lose a sense, the part of your brain that deals with it is no longer getting any input, so it falls silent, if you like. Luckily, the brain can rearrange itself to make use of the silent part. That's one of the best things about brains, in my opinion, is that they can reorganize themselves to just do whatever they need to do. The thing is, you get some really weird effects if that happens. So what's happened here appears to be the bit of the brain that deals with fingertip sensitivity, which is immediately next to the bit of the brain that deals with colours, anyway, in a person who is sighted. The bit of the fingertip starts kind of encroaching on the bit with the colours, and the ghost sensation of what used to go on in that bit of the brain starts showing up in this new activity that it's being used for. So there's option one. Option two, you could take some psychoactive drugs. Please do not do this. Or if you are going to, then please do it in a safe environment and check your local drug laws. There are a lot of different psychotropic drugs that seem to cause something like synesthesia. One fairly well explored example is ayahuasca, which is used by the peoples of the Amazon basin. And it gives you psychedelic visions, I think is probably the best way to describe it. They're generally psychedelic visions in response to music. They seem to go with any sounds that you hear. So this sounds an awful lot like synesthesia, but it's temporary. It's a lot less stable than synesthesia otherwise seems to be. So you don't get the fairly steady relationship between inducer and concurrent that people seem to if they've had synesthesia from birth. And obviously, yeah, there are dangers attached to taking drugs. So people may or may not wish to try this. The third one is not dangerous, but it is very boring. You can train yourself into becoming a synesthete for some kinds of synesthesia, I should probably say. So you can do training in a variety of ways. Generally, when people have tried this, they've worked through these 4 steps. And you start with presenting a single letter in the correct colour. So say you want someone to learn that E should be green, you just show them E in green repeatedly. After they've got used to that, you ask them to recall what colour the letter should be. So you show them E in black and go, what colour should this be? You can then move on to more passive things. So embedding letters of the right colour in sentences that people are reading. You can actually get a browser plugin that does this if you want to try it. And after a while, you can try embedding blocks of the right colour in sentences. So here in this one, you can see the letters are no longer there, only the colours. So it kind of reinforces the connection back the other way, not just from letter to colour, but from colour to letter. And after 9 weeks of training, participants do report synesthesia-like experiences, but that is 9 weeks of training every day, something like 15 minutes. It's pretty boring. We don't know how long it lasts, and we don't really know if it's like synesthesia in any other way than superficially. So those are your options, and you might go, I don't like any of those options, but I have some good news. Everyone has at least some ability to match across the senses. And before I get onto that, I will stop here and ask for questions because I can see there are a few flashing up.
Yes, I think Joanne Nuttall has just joined us. She was our speaker last month.
Hello.
But she wants to know, has there been any brain imaging studies on this or any information which brain networks are involved?
So, all right, off the top of my head, there have been several studies on something called diffusion tensor imaging, which looks at, I guess you can think of it as the connectivity between different parts of the brain. And it does look like synesthetes have a higher degree of connection between different parts of the brain compared to other people. The other research, it's more on the level of put someone into an fMRI scanner and see if the bit of their brain that deals with colour lights up, both when they are looking at an actual colour and when they're looking at something in black and white that should cause a colour. So I think people recently have moved away from brain imaging studies of synesthesia and more towards sort of how do synesthetes behave and what do synesthetes think.
Thank you.
Matt Crooks asks, are the phrases feeling blue and green with envy related to synesthesia? That's a good question.
Oh, good question. So potentially yes, at their very roots. But I would say at this point in human history, they're so well embedded in culture that they're more just metaphorical statements that that people use without really thinking of them as though they are colours. But yeah, they could have originated with a synesthete who had those kinds of experiences.
I think those are the only 2 questions at the moment, unless anyone else has got any questions.
Great. Okay. Well then, let us play the dog game. This is one of my favorite games, and it's very simple. When you see a dog that you don't know, you guess what it's called. And if the owner hears you, you can find out whether they've called their dog by the correct name. So we're going to play a few rounds of this. I'm just going to show you a couple of dogs and 2 names. And all I want you to do is decide which dog has which name. So I've made some predictions on the final slide. I think don't put these in the chat, just kind of keep count to yourself. Maybe discuss them with the person next to you if you're not on your own. Okay, so pair 1. One of these dogs is called Miki, one is called Moko. Which is which? Okay, round 2. Miki and Moko again. Spoiler alert, it will be all the same names all the way through just to make it simple.
Oh. Oh.
I have just noticed an error on my next slide. It says round 2 again. This is actually round 3. So, but it's still Miki and Moko. All right, and here are my predictions. Was I right? You can tell me in the chat. Yay! Okay, is this confirmation bias though? Is there someone sitting there going, no, what? Okay, perfect. First 2 were right. Okay, that's good. 1 out of 3. Okay. All right, well, okay, so it looks like I've got it right for all or the majority of the time for most of the people who've said it. So that's good enough for me. I will say every time I play this, my heart is in my mouth because I'm like, oh God, what if this is the time it doesn't work? But it generally does. So the reason this works is that this is based on something called a cross-modal correspondence, which I'll explain more in a second. People typically match small or light things with high-pitched noises. So small dogs will be likely to be called Miki, and light-colored dogs will be more likely to be called Miki than Moko, because E is a higher pitched vowel than O. This is an example of a cross-modal correspondence. It's things that go together across the senses and seem to be the result of innate biases in how we process sensory information. Also years of experience. So for example, we know small dogs go yap and large dogs go woof, and possibly the role of language. So the way in which we describe certain things tends to go together across the senses. So we use the word high not only to describe things that are literally high in the visual plane, but also to describe things that are figuratively high in musical pitch. So those kinds of linguistic things go together. All right, so I've got a few more examples of this which don't involve dogs. So first of all, which scent goes better with a high-pitched tone and which goes better with a low-pitched tone? Again, you can tell me in the chat. Okay. So I'm generally getting coffee is low and orange is high with a few disagreements. Okay, great. Yep, that is in fact what this research found. So this is another example of a cross-modal correspondence. We, for whatever reason, think of the rich smell of coffee as being low-pitched and the, I was going to say the high-pitched scent of citrus. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like a citrus scent is sharp, and sharp is associated with high. All right, another example. Oh, if I can get my computer to do it, there we go. Okay, so which scent goes better with a round shape? So ignoring what these look like, and that's pepper on the left and raspberry on the right. So which one goes better with a round shape? Raspberries round. Oh, a bit more disagreement here. Okay. So the original study did find that raspberry is considered round and pepper is considered spiky. I do think maybe I should rephrase this question for the future. So which scent goes better with a spiky shape? People would be more likely to say pepper, because I think, for me at least, pepper makes me sneeze, and things that make you sneeze feel spiky. I don't know if that's synesthesia or if I've hit on something there, but there we go. Okay, so we can see that generally people can make these kinds of links across senses. Not everyone does, and not everyone does it consistently. This appears to be because it's not happening at a conscious level. It's happening at an unconscious level and only comes out when someone asks you this kind of question. So you might be going, oh, well, this is great, Claire, but what use are cross-modal correspondences? Well, let me tell you. This is Tilly. She is one of the best cats in the world, especially compared to the other cat, Gizmo, who is an eldritch terror. Tilly is just a standard cat, really. She's mostly brown, she's yellow and black, she's stripy in places, she's furry, she's soft, she's warm. She often smells like hay, and I don't know quite how she's managed that. And she's often purring. The question is, how do I know that all of those properties belong to just one animal? They're all coming in through different sensory organs. They're all getting processed in different places in my brain. How on earth have I made Tilly out of this and not Tilly plus a blanket, for example, or Tilly mixed with Gizmo, or even Tilly mixed with whatever else happens to be in the room? So this is one of the hardest problems in psychology research. It's called the binding problem. And if we think about this, colors are coming in through my eyes, stripy, also coming in through my eyes, hay smells coming in through my nose, purrs are coming in through my ears, the warmth and the softness is coming in through my skin. And if we look at the brain, all of these things are getting done in different places as well. So this bit at the back is your visual cortex, where stripy and colours are going in. And we can see warm and furry are going in at the top, where you have your somatosensory cortex. Then we've got the hay smell and the purrs coming in quite close to each other, but kind of coincidentally. So all of these different bits of the brain that are coping with binding Tilly. And the nice thing about cross-modal correspondences is they can help us make predictions. So here's a close-up on Tilly's belly. And you can probably tell me, even without knowing anything else other than that's furry, that this texture is more likely to be warm than it is to be cool. And it's more likely to smell of hay than it is to smell of lemon. That one might be a bit more tricky. Cats really hate citrus. So cats are unlikely to smell of lemon. The thing is, you can tell those bits of information just from me saying Tilly is furry. From that, you can make all kinds of other predictions, and that saves a lot on processing power in the brain. The final thing I want to tell you about is a practical joke or a take-home experiment, depending on what you want to do with this. So, first of all, I'd just like you to demonstrate, demonstrate to you why this works. So what I'm going to do is put up some descriptors that people have talked about for wine odors. So all I'd like you to do is guess whether the person in question is talking about a red wine or a white wine from this odor. All right. Again, you can say in the chat if you want. So is straw white wine or red wine? Okay. mostly getting white. And indeed, that is the case. All right, next one, melon. It's all right, Philip, you're not a Philistine. Okay, also white. Oh, pink. You can't have pink, Nicola. I said red or white. Okay, prune, red. Cinnamon, red. Butter, white. Some reds in there. Okay. Cherry, red. Okay. Cocoa, red again. And I think this is the last one. Yep. So honey. And we've gone back to white. Excellent. Okay. So the wine is green. Should I drink it? No. That's my considered opinion. You can trust me. I'm a doctor, not that kind. Okay. So this stuff comes from an experiment by Morrow et al. In 2001. So you might be able to spot a pattern in this, which is that people tend to come up with smells that describe dark things for the red wine and smells that describe light things for the white wine. The interesting thing is, in this experiment, both of those wines were exactly the same. It's just that the white wine had had food dye added to it, and then people started shifting over to describing it as though it were a red wine. So there's some debate about whether this experiment was fair. It was done with student sommeliers in, I think, Paris. So they should have known what was going on with wine, but sometimes people have replicated it, sometimes people haven't. It might be an interesting thing to try if you know a wine buff, see if they can spot what you've done. And that is the end of my talk. So just a reminder, this is my blog, thatthinkingfeeling.co.uk. You can talk to me on Twitter if you really want, although I'm not on there very much, thatthinkfeel, and you can email me at thatthinkingfeeling@gmail.com.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Claire. That was really interesting. So I did learn a lot because, as I said, I didn't really know anything about synesthesia, apart from having heard about it. So if anybody else has got any questions, do they want to speak up or write the questions in chat?